Yes, love's a secret weapon. Yeah!
Hi, I'm Donna Loren.
And I'm Dr. Adam Gerace.
And you are listening to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast.
From Hollywood, in color, it's The Dating Game. And here's the star of our show and your host, Jim Lang.
Thank you and good evening. We're a wild group tonight. Listen, there's been a spectacular spate of articles recently in our national magazines on the subject of love. And they hold one common belief. Love can only happen. And when it does, it is wholly mysterious, irrational, inexplicable, and yet so rare that the finest poets have never succeeded in fully expressing its joy.
Hi, and welcome back to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast. My name's Dr. Adam Gerace, and I'm here with Donna. Hello, Donna.
Hello. Oh, my gosh, darling. I love you so much and appreciate our communion and our cooperation and our communication over the most wonderful subject, Love.
Fantastic. Love. Absolutely. And I think we're both kind of tuning into some sort of energetic approach today. We're ready to go, and I think we're excited because today we're actually taking a European trip to France and Italy, all starting with the dating game.
Buonasera.
Buonasera does actually figure into what we're going to talk about today as well. But it's interesting because we're talking about the dating game, and it looks like the dating game has actually been rebooted yet again and is currently airing on American TV as the Celebrity Dating Game.
Amazing.
So it's something that keeps going because, of course, the dating game was created by the, I guess, creative and very colourful Chuck Barris. I'm sure some of our listeners are aware of his colourful history. They might have seen the movie based on his book, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, with George Clooney. But his empire of creating TV shows and particularly game shows really started with the dating game in 1965 when that premiered in daytime and quickly became so popular it became a primetime show. And for those who remember it, essentially what happens is a bachelorette comes out and gets to ask questions to a series of bachelors who are hidden from her.
Wait a minute. This is both ways now. This is not gender, specific because it's the bachelor who could be in the hot seat and it could be the bachelorette that could be in the hot seat.
Right. So there we go. So it could go either way. So one is asking the questions, whether it's the bachelor or the bachelorette, and then behind the petition, the three contestants. And then based on that, he or she makes a choice of who's going to be their date. And
so many different people. I mean, I guess some people were lay people, but others were actual celebrities that came on and I imagine went on the date that was chosen for them. If I know I did.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we sort of did a bit of research to look at how many people had either come onto the dating game, whether they were already famous, whether they were kind of in the public eye, but perhaps had not gone on to do what they're known for. And, we found people like Farrah Fawcett, Lindsay Wagner.
Steve Martin
in I think it was either the late 60s or early 70s.
An entertaining guy, bachelor number 2, hails from Waco, Texas. He's a writer, currently laying out the last for the Smothers Brothers. And we're delighted to welcome Steve Martin. Good luck to you, Steve.
Kramer, Michael Richards from Seinfeld. Can you? Who else was there? There was Suzanne Summers,
David Cassidy.
Yeah, David Cassidy. Now that would be the one to win.
And my friend Paul Peterson.
Absolutely, Paul Peterson was on it as well. I think Mama Cass was on it. Even Adam West. By that point he would have already have done Batman. Andy Kaufman. The list just goes on and on. I know.
That would have been a trip.
Depends which persona he came out with as well. You never know. But and of course, the dating game, as we said, has just been adapted all over the world. It's run in the United States at various times over decades. We had a version of it here. I don't know if it was called the dating game. I think it was called Perfect Match. Which was very popular in the 80s and 90s, and again was brought back, I think, a few years ago. Now, this is the weirdest thing. There was a children's television show puppet in the 80s and 90s called Agro, and when they rebooted Perfect Match, Agro was one of the hosts. So he's essentially made out of a bath mat. So. It just keeps on keeping on. But this is really our entree into talking about the travels you did, not only for the dating game, because as you said, you did go on the actual date, because generally on the primetime show, I think the daytime show, the prize was probably a weekend away somewhere fairly close. But in the primetime show, some of the trips for the contestants were, overseas trips.
Yeah, very elaborate, actually.
Yeah, very elaborate for that time. And so I think we've probably given it enough of an introduction, and of course we're gonna unpack that all. But
let's bring it all the way up to the 22nd century, though. Here, let's bring it to 21. Where are we now? 2021, the 21st century. And Match.com and all of the online dating services that are kind of spawned from those television show concepts. So
that's so true. I hadn't actually thought about that. On a dating app, put up a little bit of information about yourself. There are pictures compared to, I guess, the dating game where you didn't see the person until the end. But essentially, you're putting out, your imaginary answers to questions and seeing who's interested.
I've known a couple times, people that have had successful relationships, maybe not long term, but, they get a chance to meet someone and actually get to know one another, and quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a different, I kind of did a little bit of that dating, but that was a long time ago, and it was only just kind of coming in at that time.
Sure.
Yeah, so yeah.
Well, mine was a disaster. Let me just say that as a preview. At any rate, when I begin my story, I think it'll come full circle and I will explain myself.
Absolutely. I look forward to it, and I'm sure our listeners look forward to it. We've been getting some great messages on Facebook and social media. You can send your questions or comments to podcast@donnaloren.net. As always, we'll read some of those comments out later in the show. But should we go on to the very colourful set of the dating game?
Yes, we continue with chapter 11. Oh my gosh.
It's a long one, isn't it, this one?
Yes, blowing out the candles.
Go, Donna.
The episode of the dating game that I was on opened with me sitting on a grand piano, lip syncing my latest release on Reprise, Let's Pretend.
I only live because you love me. I died the day you said goodbye. I wanna hear you say you love me, even if it's so long. Let's pretend things are like they were before the end. Let's pretend we're still lovers and not just friends. Trick my mind with a lie. It doesn't matter if you love me, I've gotta have you somehow. Oh, let's pretend things are like they were for the end. Let's pretend we're still lovers and not just friends. Ring my mind with a light from your lips. Fool my being with your fingertips. Keep my soul with the promise you break. Keep me dreaming of your heart away. And let's pretend. Oh, let's pretend. Let's
There was a commercial break that allowed me to jump off the piano and reposition myself in the questioner's chair, where I would ask the three bachelors questions to determine which one I would choose. I was really nervous about this part. My girlfriend Janice accompanied my dad and me on this occasion. I asked her to give me some signal from her position in the audience who to pick. The host, Jim Lang, caught wind of what I was trying to do and blocked my view. Too bad. I chose a real dud. When the prize was announced that we were going to Paris, I hoped that we could make the best of it. In the end, I was given a chaperone who was the assistant director of the show, Tom Turbovich. Apparently, it was decided that my chaperone would not be my dad. Soon after I knew that I was leaving for Paris, I went to read for the part of Gina Lollobrigida's daughter in the movie Buonasera, Mrs. Campbell. The meeting was held at the Beverly Hills Hotel in a suite where the writer, director, producer Melvin Frank was staying. Of course, my dad was by my side as we entered Mr. Frank's beautiful and legendary hotel room. Then there was a turning of events. Mr. Frank asked Maury to leave the room. It was quite awkward for me and unusual that this request was made. Maury complied. With my dad waiting in the hallway, Mr. Frank took a seat next to me on his sofa and handed me a script. He then said, "This is your part." I began, and when the instructions came in the script to show more emotion and even coming to the point of tears, my experience and sensibilities sort of hit the ball out of the park. At that moment, I felt his hand on my leg sliding up to raise my hemline. Was this a casting couch? Suddenly, he sheepishly said, "This always happens to me in Hollywood." I put my hand on his and asserted myself gently while he removed it from my leg. He then said, "I'd like to screen test you in Rome. Can you be there in July?" I replied with, "Well, I am going to Paris tomorrow. Let me go talk to my father." Phew! I got out of that man's clutches. As I closed the door to his suite and approached my dad, I told him what just happened. I could never take direction from a man like that, even though he was reasonable enough not to go to any extremes. Maury just stood there and sort of brushed it off in his typical way. I had no one to turn to. How could my father not defend me? His ambition for me outweighed his principles. I had to take a deep breath and re-enter the room and face the situation with as much grace and dignity that I could muster up. I hid my feelings of being insulted and demeaned and allowed these two men to make plans for my future. Lenny's reaction to me leaving was insecurity over whether our new love would last with an extensive separation. I cried all night before I had to leave for Paris. I didn't want to leave him. After a 14-hour nonstop flight with the contestant that won the trip and my chaperone, we landed in Paris. I remember arriving in time for a late dinner of a bright green salad. There was a bit of protein in my salad that matched the exact color of the lettuce leaf. Only half of a little green worm remained. What an initiation. We checked into our rooms and afterward went on a tour of the city. I remember being driven around the streets of Paris, past the Notre Dame Cathedral, and late into the evening, the red light district where the Moulin Rouge was. Our first night in Paris was at the Hilton, where English was spoken. And after I was shown to my room, I went to use the bathroom and was surprised to find what I thought were two toilets. I immediately called down to the front desk and asked which one I should use. I so naively asked, "What is the one that looks like I should wash my feet in?" The person at the desk said in a thick, broken French accent, No, that's what you wash babies out in." Of course, this is my first experience with a bidet, which I've grown to love in later life. The next day, the three of us were driven to a little place called Tours in the countryside. Along the way, we stopped at several chateaux. On one of the properties, we were invited to walk into a champagne cellar that was 10 miles deep. Originally, it had been a tunnel that was built during World War II. We only made it a mile in without drinking a drop, but the bubbly wine was intoxicating to all of us just by breathing it. We then were taken to a castle and fed a proper lunch with several courses, each course having its own wine served with it. White wine served with the first course, a fish dish, a heartier second dish, which was accompanied with red wine, and the salad following that served with cheese, and then a dessert served with the bubbly champagne. I was ready for a nap. But off we went to a little inn that I remember so well, I just have to describe it for you. Have you ever slept in a real feather bed? Well, this little inn had a double feather bed that was elevated high off the floor, which I kind of had to jump into. All the bedding had feathers, a down comforter, down pillows. Everything was white and soft. I really loved interior design, so another detail of the room that really impressed me was the bathroom door adjacent to the bed. It had a window with a roll-up shade that hung from the bottom of the window floor to ceiling. For privacy, you had to hoist the shade up from the cord that hung in the middle. After living in my house on Grandview Boulevard, void of much architectural features, this room is one I would always cherish, so rich with culture and fine detail. The dating game's prize was at Le Mans. My date, my chaperone, and I were whisked off to the racetrack and up into the grandstands where we could view the speeding roadsters go by. It was a 3-hour race. I had an affinity for fast cars because I owned a Corvette, and my music arranger on Let's Pretend, Don Peake, owned a red Ferrari, which I loved going for a ride in when he would drive to a racetrack and take it out for a spin. My chaperone, Tom, was very sweet, and he knew that I was going on to Rome. He asked if he could take a few days and follow me there. Told him, sure, but I'm meeting my father at the airport. That didn't deter him. Tom and I flew the short flight from Paris to Rome and met Maury. My dad and I checked into the Cavalieri Hilton Hotel. Maury's jet lag after his long flight compromised his resistance to me going out. Lucky me, a little more freedom. I set out with Tom for a night out with a new pair of yellow lens aviators. Try wearing tinted glasses in the evening in a strange place you've never been. It's a trip. We took a horse-drawn carriage into Rome, driving by the Trevi Fountain. And when we got out of the carriage, we were walking on the Via Veneto, the famous road in Rome with bistro cafes filled with locals and tourists. I heard about a woman getting their behinds pinched, and it's true. Happens so fast. Before you know it, you're on your way. At the time, it didn't offend me. It was more a cultural experience that lived up to the expectation. Tom and I ended our evening by finding a park bench under a tree on the grounds of the Cavalieri, perched high on a knoll overlooking the city of Rome. He leaned over to give me a kiss, and I had to confess to him that my heart was really with the guy I knew back home. When Tom left Rome, I was faced with cohabitating unendingly with my dad. The Cavalieri Hilton Hotel was a modern, spacious building, every window filled with illumination, contrasting the ruins that were directly across the street where local people lived and had to pump water. In the mornings, I found myself going to the spa for my hair to be washed and blown out. It was actually in Italian money, lire, the equivalent of an American dollar. So I got very spoiled and made a habit of it while I was waiting to hear from Mel Frank about my screen test. That call arrived, and the script was delivered with instructions that I had to learn how to smoke tobacco cigarettes. Oh, I was dreading that. Me, the one that carries an inhaler in my purse and keeps one in the suitcase on hand in case of emergency. Me, the one who had a disdain for the smell of cigarette smoke, even though my new boyfriend Lenny was an avid smoker. Off to the tobacco shop I went, Maury at my side, to find the most mentholated cigarettes I could. Then up to the hotel room to give it a try. My dad was a pipe smoker. Maybe he didn't quite have the skill to tell me how to smoke a cigarette. I was on my own, with no help from anyone. I sat on the edge of my bed and lit the cigarette. The only other time I ever did that was inhaling one of a different variety, and so I only knew I should inhale and hold the smoke. That's what I did with my first puff, and I passed out, fell back on the bed, and when I came to, it was a half hour later. All I could feel was my head spinning. I learned very quickly to puff, not to inhale. I actually never enjoyed the indulgence, but as I was learning my part for the screen test, I began handling the cigarette as naturally and comfortably as I possibly could. News arrived of when the screen test was to be shot. A car came for Maury and I and drove us to Cinecittà Studios. Along the way, I saw the old ancient aqueducts built by the Romans and the remnants of where so many were crucified along the Appian Way. 45 minutes later, and here I am, where Federico Fellini and Marcello Mastroianni and my namesake Sofia had created so many masterpieces of Italian cinema. Clint Eastwood's spaghetti westerns used Cinecittà as well as scenes from Ben-Hur and Cleopatra. Standing outside the pool one day at the Cavalieri Hilton, I could see a yellow Ferrari driving up the narrow, windy road. The man behind the wheel was Clint Eastwood. My first stop was makeup. I was ambushed by the makeup artist when she told me that my eyes should be more of an almond shape. She took something like Scotch tape and pulled my eyes back. The makeup was minimal, as was my hair and clothing, and sort of drab. And then the hell began. I reunited with the director, Mr. Frank. Combination of his actions in the hotel room when he began lifting my dress and the lack of support that I got from my dad left a stain on my memory. The cold reading that had successfully brought me to this place fell flat in my screen test. To complicate matters, smoking might have been exciting for someone else my age, but not for me. And then having to alter my appearance with tape on my face proved to me that I wasn't ready for taking on the challenge of this acting. I couldn't surrender myself to all of these challenges. If only I had respected the director, I would have complied and adopted the characteristics chosen for the character. We broke for lunch, and I have to say that I had a very positive experience while sitting under an arbor shaded by a vine. That was my first time eating buffalo mozzarella, which I adore. Slices of tomato and fresh basil, a drizzle of good olive oil, and a sprinkle of balsamic. It was a hot summer day, and it was refreshing to be outside in this cool, shaded place where I imagined Sophia and Marcello having lunch. I was filled with anxiety over the day behind me, and so that night I went on my own to the dining room in the hotel and waited for Maury to join me. I ordered a carafe of red wine, something I wouldn't ordinarily do, and began drinking. Several minutes later, my dad walked into the restaurant and sat down next to me. He looked at my half-empty glass and poured me another one. I honestly don't remember much about dinner. What I do remember are two men holding me up under my arms, lifting me up above the floor to carry me out. This was my first time being inebriated, Maury being the accomplice to my inappropriate behavior. He was teaching me a lesson, giving me enough rope to hang myself. He saw me drinking, and I assume he thought, well, you're starting without me? Okay, let's show you what it's like. My head in the toilet, face down, realizing what I had eaten for dinner, I apparently swallowed my string beans whole. Oh, what a way to learn a lesson. Needless to say, I remained sober for the rest of my stay in Rome. Maury received a call from Warner Brothers in Los Angeles saying that the Rome office of Warner Brothers Records wanted me to sing a song in Italian for the theme in a movie called Once Before I Die. I was already getting a feel for the Italian language, but it was pretty much limited to ordering my food from a menu like linguini con burro and the salutations ciao and per piacere. I was ready to take on the challenge of learning the song phonetically. I went into a beautiful studio and sang with the pre-recorded track I assume is the same from my English version. I was also scheduled to do some promotion, so down to Alberobello in southern Italy, Maury and I went, leaving Rome at night on a train. It was an antiquated train, and we were given a pitcher and a basin after we were shown to the space where we would lie down. Clickety-clack, all night long to the Adriatic, where we got off the train in the morning. Alberobello is a town at 2,000 feet elevation. A car came along and drove us up a winding, steep road to the top, where all I saw were whitewashed little huts with thatched roofs and the narrow little roads that were built for donkey carts. The predominant building in the town was a tattered, aqua-painted church. In this tiny town of antiquity, the streets were bare by noon. No one showed their face until 4 o'clock. The Italian ritual in summer is everything closes down for a midday meal accompanied by generous servings of wine, followed by a siesta. Maury and I were invited to go see the way a family in Alberobello lived. As we were walking down a narrow road, we passed by a park bench where several old men were sitting. Close by was a big mound of white powder. Later, I found out that these men were only in their 40s, and the white powder was lime, a substance that was used to whitewash all the buildings for 2,000 years. The men aged quickly because they began working hard when they were just boys. On our way to the house we were visiting, my eye caught the sight of someone in a dark doorway holding a pitchfork. The face of a young boy flushed from heat, almost crimson were his cheeks while he toiled pitching hay. The family we visited showed us how they stored their food and belongings in the ceiling of their pitch-thatch roof. You'd think that heat rises, but in this case, that was the coolest place. I heard a rumble coming from the distance. A red Ferrari roared by, the only one in this tiny town, high above the cliffs of the Adriatic. We were offered a bowl of pasta with fresh baby octopus and squid, something I had never eaten before but was actually quite delicious. We said our goodbyes and thank yous. Maury and I then wandered into a gelato cafe, as the townspeople were just waking up after their siestas and piling in for a limonada. Very refreshing on a hot summer day. The next day, Maury and I were taken to ruins outside of Alberobello to film a performance of the song Once Before I Die. Nearby on the way was a wagon filled with handmade crochet shawls, and I bought one in lavender to match the dress I was wearing. We received a message from Mel Frank's office that Gina Lollobrigida wanted to meet me. Maury and I boarded a train and went back to Rome, richer for the experience we just had. Entering Gina Lollobrigida's property was magical. It had a cypress-lined driveway that seemed to go on for a mile before you finally got a glimpse of the house in the distance. Mel Frank, my dad, and I were greeted at the movie siren's door by her housekeeper, who led us past a grand piano into a sitting room. I couldn't help but notice the only photograph that was framed and sitting on this black grand piano was a photo of a young boy, naked with his back to us, bending over and looking through his legs. Miss Lollobrigida's house was decorated in a very royal way. The sofa was like the bed I slept in Tours. I had to jump up to get into it and sink into the cushions made of down, my feet not even touching the floor. In comes Miss Lollobrigida and sits between Mr. Frank and myself. She speaks to him of her love of photography. Apparently, she took the picture that was resting on the piano. I asked her who was in that picture, and she said lovingly, "That's my son." We visited for a while, and she offered us a cool drink of cola, not Dr. Pepper. Her attitude toward me was a bit icy, but it was exciting being in her presence and in her home. Would she choose me to be her film daughter? Back at the hotel, we awaited the call about the screen test. Maury said to me, "I hope we can stay here longer. Let's milk it." I told him, "I miss being home. Don't you miss Mom and the boys?" And he shot back, "Of course, but we're here now, and I want to stay as long as I can." I was already in Rome for at least 2 weeks, and I missed Lenny. When I did get a call from him that same day, the connection was very staticky. Maury was in the room, which compromised my ability to show Lenny any intimacy, and he felt it. I told him absence makes the heart grow fonder when he expressed to me that he wasn't sure how he would feel when I came home. I knew that I felt the same about him, but being so far away for so long clouded my emotions, and we ended on a very indecisive note. Time dragged on, and we ultimately stayed in Rome for 5 weeks until the decision was made to hire another actress, Janet Margolin, the other girl who had been screen tested for the same part. I was also told that when Gina Lollobrigida met me, she decided she wanted someone a little bit more plain to play her daughter. I detected a trace of jealousy and competition in Gina that has haunted me throughout my life. The awareness I have now is that when one harbors feelings such as jealousy, that energy becomes a magnet attracting more of it. And with that awareness, you begin to shrink those feelings and evolve into a recognition when it occurs. Literally, the jealousy becomes a tiny light in your head shining a message to not go there. Just be aware of it. Of course, it all really started with my mom.
Wow, how evocative to be hearing about Europe and France and Italy, particularly right now when so many of us can't travel. That was just a joy to listen to and to be reminded of those eternal cities.
It was a special time, Adam. You know, the opportunity to go overseas and experience the city of Paris. I mean, let's face it, what happened to Notre Dame Cathedral not that long ago, you know, when it burned. And I believe it's been reconstructed for the most part.
I think so, yeah. Last time I'd kind of heard about it, yeah.
Yeah, just to see, how shall I say, it's stepping back into time, because being in America, and maybe you feel the same way in Australia, they're young countries.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
You know, and buildings that are 100 to 200 years old seem ancient to us, right?
Yeah, we see, you know, when I see an 1836 here, I'm like, oh, that's got to be one of the old ones. And that's not old at all by European standards, you know.
No, I mean, like when I was on my way to Cinecittà, my goodness, you know, 2,000 years of history going by. And I'll never forget, there was a pathway that I got to walk on and it was saved. And who knows, it could have just been a touristy kind of thing. But when I stepped on this little path in Rome, it was said to have been a path that Jesus had walked on. And just the concept of that, to be time capsuled all the way back there and experience something was just, unforgettable.
It really does make you realize the length of history, in terms of who has come before and what has come before, and how we're all part of this very long, civilization. When I was in Rome, it was very similar. When I was in Athens, it was very similar. Thinking these were where, the people you'd read about in history class had lived and walked and moved and probably touched what's left of that column that's, somewhere on the Acropolis. And
it really is connecting. And weren't you in Arborabello as well?
No, we never made it down there. That's somewhere where we've always had on the list, particularly because Arborabello's in Bari and kind of next to it. So if you think of Bari, I guess, as being the heel of the shoe of Italy, Calabria, where my family's from, is actually the foot. But we just never got there when we went. Probably, what was it, about almost 15 years ago. So I would love to go there, and I'd love to have a look at both. But again, just that idea of the evocativeness, I guess, of those buildings, that use of the lime to have the completely white buildings, and that kind of, I guess, back then and perhaps now, that slower pace of life. You have your nap after a lunch, and then you emerge in the early evening to go out to dinner, or you
have to have it. You have to have it. I mean, what a great way of life, to have this time during the day after you've eaten a meal, which everyone. The fast food industry has changed that whole mentality of, eating your burger in a car on your way to somewhere. And, just time is so precious. And to have that experience of really enjoying the food that comes from the earth, and just a lot of the times it's being outside, and the whole experience just makes you feel alive.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a kind of a movement at the moment, sort of in the well-being space, about mindful eating, because as you're saying, so much of our time is not spent being mindful about anything, but particularly eating. It's kind of seen as this means to an end, whether you do it in the car, you do it at your desk at work. And this idea of actually stopping to sort of savor those experiences, which will not only make you probably fuller quicker, but allows you to enjoy it more. And it's interesting what you talk about in the reading about I guess there's a bit of a contrast. There's the old, and there was lots of old where you were, but then you have something like the Cavalieri Hotel, which at that point would have been quite a new hotel. I think it only celebrated its 50th anniversary 5, 6, 7 years ago. I think it's a part of the Waldorf hotel chain now, but back then that must have been a beautiful, as it still is, a beautiful modern hotel perched up on a hill.
It was brand new, and awesome to see. I don't know how many windows there would have been, but let's just say, for the sake of numbers, seeing 100 windows or more lit up with electricity, and then all around it were war-torn buildings, where people were still living very, rough and crudely. And it was just very paradoxical,
Yeah, and I think paradoxical is an interesting way of describing the whole trip. There were so many contrasts from what you were talking about. And first of all, I'm sorry that your date was a dud. These things happen, though. But
it was really, really hard for me to, because of my work ethic, it was just really hard for me to kind of switch, from something that's programmed and rehearsed and it's set, and then to kind of have that stream of consciousness and use your judgment, which obviously in my youth was always kind of hoodwinked by all the adults that were kind of running my life. So no way I could choose someone just from listening to them, listening to them answer questions that
Mm,
I was reading, and there was no way. But what a gift that the young assistant director, Tom
mm.
Turbevich, maybe a few years older than me, was able to accompany me, and he showed me great compassion and companionship. So no loss there.
No, absolutely. And of course, some of our listeners might be aware of his work. He did a whole lot of sort of filmed concerts for TV. I think he did the Midnight Special TV series like that. He directed a whole range of comedy series, Laverne and Shirley. I think he did Dinosaurs and Muppets Tonight and things like that. And of course, he did the music video and the documentary for the We Are the World song in the 80s. So,
How appropriate.
he he went on to do quite a lot. Tom, if you're out there, we'd love to talk to you. Please, drop us a
Yes,
line
Tom, it would be such a pleasure reuniting with you.
to relive some of those times. And of course, our listeners who follow you also on social media and your website and so on have probably seen there are some photos out there from that trip.
Well, a few, I think.
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic. You're right. The choices that Maury made, or maybe he was restricted in some cases because there were sets, and
Mm,
like I don't remember seeing I mean, maybe I did. I can't remember now if I ever saw the screen test, but
mm,
I
mm.
sure didn't enjoy doing it. That's for sure.
Yeah, it is interesting as you say, because I can kind of remember one, I think, with the shawl, and I think that's been used quite a few times.
Ah,
There
that's
might
true.
did that. I think that even made it onto your very best of CD.
Oh,
Uh,
that's true. And also, I remember when we were touring around Rome, that at the Colosseum, he kind of gotten, a little enthusiastic about taking his camera out. It's so crazy. It's like it was up to him to be inspired.
I guess that's so true, isn't it? So of course, who knows where the recorded songs in Italian are. I presume they're probably sitting in a vault somewhere in
Yeah.
Warner Brothers in Italy, and of course, the interesting thing about the dating game is hopefully we will get to see that one day. They do pop up on TV every now and then, and there's some on YouTube. But I was reading the other day a blog post by a writer, Ken Levine, who wrote Frasier and Cheers and a whole range of other things, and he was actually a contestant on the dating game. I think
Uh-huh.
the daytime version in the 60s, and he said that he had heard that many of the primetime, well, I don't know if it was the primetime tapes, but many of the dating game tapes were in a warehouse in New Jersey existing, but had not been labeled. So the
Mm.
ability to kind of find them. So, it'd be wonderful to see them because of course, that's set in color, because so much of what
Yeah.
you were doing at this time in color, which I know in a previous episode we spoke about the Milton Bell show, and we were actually questioning because a lot of
Yes.
the YouTube videos are in black and white, but that show actually was in color. So there's so
Okay.
much of this kind of emerging at this time. If you think of the dating game set and so on, it's really sort of entering that late 60s kind of mod,
Hmm.
almost hippie movement, and perhaps a bit of a change in sensibilities as well. The fact that there could be something like the dating game where particularly women were able
Mm.
to choose their bachelor, albeit not knowing who was behind the screen.
Or let's just be more progressive and incorporate all
Mm, mm.
LGBTQ, right?
Absolutely, yes. And it'll be interesting to see if they do that on the new the new iteration of it. So
I can see that.
yeah, and it would be great, and it would be very much in step with
Hmm.
the wider world. But it's interesting what you talk about. I guess there is that sort of this theme of liberation coming about in your own life in the reading, as well as the world at that time. But as you said, there was always that conflict, and there was always that push and pull. And I kind of wonder whether even Maury, teaching you a so-called lesson with the wine. And we've all been there. We've all had that first time of being carted out of somewhere.
How humiliating.
Oh my goodness! I remember that. I think the first time I had done that at a nightclub, and security guard came up to me and said, "Stand up, or I'll stand you up." And I said, "I think you're going to need to stand me up."
My goodness.
So I didn't make that mistake for a while again. But yeah, it almost seems like in some ways he was starting to feel that there was going to be this loss of control.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and so asserting it there, but
I mean,
yeah.
let me just paint a very vivid picture.
Mm,
Here I am, 20 years old,
mm,
and my dad is sharing again, as usual,
mm,
a room with me, and so
mm.
we're cohabitating for 5 weeks.
Did it feel, because that had, of course, had happened right from the beginning of your career, and I know we spoke about it when you first started working for Dr. Pepper, how there'd be the twin sort of bed situation.
Yeah,
Did you find there was a difference, because, of course, he arrived later in the piece, between your experience of kind of being taken out almost as a young woman, whether it was with Tom, whether it was at the wine tasting or the afternoon lunch in France, that it kind of then clicked back into the sort of old routine once he had arrived?
absolutely. I mean,
Mm,
first of all, I was shocked
mm,
that he anytime he wasn't there, it was like something, I lost an appendage or something, because
mm,
he was always there. And then there was this inconsistency, and who knows? I mean, he made it to Italy, and I don't know. Again, I was not in command of the plans.
mm.
So
Yeah, and I think it again sort of highlights this issue of, there was that so much of that hovering over you, but there wasn't necessarily that support. We spoke earlier on in a previous episode about this whole idea of being at a restaurant with a journalist from
mhm.
17 who started asking sort of inappropriate questions, and Maury not stepping in, and that was during the Beach Party films.
Yeah.
And here we have this other situation of Mel Frank trying something in his office. And I'm just shocked by the hubris of the fact that your father's sitting out the outside of the door and he tries something like that. But I guess, as we've heard from the Me Too movement, particularly in the entertainment industry, about people's a hubris is the only word that comes to mind, but there's something more than that. Just that willingness to try to do something like that while someone's on the other side of the door there. But the fact that you didn't feel that you got that support after what had happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost cinematic in a way, because the room that I was in, this beautiful
Mm,
hotel suite, was
mm.
beautifully lit by sunlight and so forth. And as soon as I opened the door to the hallway, it was like a dark shadow, And there I stood with Maury,
Mm,
telling him what had just happened, and that I would not be able to respond to this man's directions. And
mm,
he told me, basically to get a grip and forget about it, and and just act like nothing happened, which that was the only time
mm.
that anything had kind of trespassed in that way,
Yeah.
because I was always supervised. And I have no idea, but that was my experience. That's the
Mm,
way I handled it. And then the outcome was obviously, the truth that I tried to say,
mm.
but as fate would have it, you go along and you have these experiences, and I guess you just chalk it off, right?
Well, it's interesting that, just that, I guess, that expectation of women at that time, and of course now as well. We were texting the other day because, of course, the Britney Spears
Yeah.
situation and the control, there. And I know Amber Tamblyn, an actress,
Hmm.
wrote a New York Times article, a really interesting one,
Yes.
sort of talking about what had, with her, the idea, particularly about the topic of money, which we've spoken about a lot in this podcast, or someone in this podcast, that given her money was also handled by her family, including her
Hmm.
father, who's a really esteemed actor, Russ Tamblyn, of course, from West Side Story and other movies. But anyway, the idea of when money, that you're making money as a young person, and in this case, both as young women in the music or movie or TV industry, and the blurring of the lines that comes about when money becomes a family thing and it's managed by parents and family. So, there's some interesting, current parallels with what we talk about, this idea of control and
Hmm.
that blurring of boundaries.
Hmm. Yeah, it becomes a territorial, domineering kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about Britney Spears.
Mm,
And obviously she was extremely successful
mm,
and had a tremendous, amount to offer, not just to her immediate family, but to
mm,
other members and friends.
mm,
But whatever it is, whatever the amount is, and whatever you're worth, your own sense of worth diminishes when you feel like a commodity. And
yes.
and it's not just, I have to say that it's, from my personal experience, it's not just in the entertainment business. It's anyone that feels that they're being used for whatever material gains, and and then they shy away,
Mm,
or if you're born into that kind of situation and you inherit, and and you're more or less afraid to associate with anyone that might take advantage. So
mm,
yeah, it's pretty perilous. And hopefully moving forward, with more consciousness. I mean, that was only 50 years ago or whatever. It's
mm,
crazy, crazy, crazy that, that consciousness has been so prevalent. But going forward, a child convinced to do something and threatened in their family, if they don't, um, I see it changing a bit. It
mm,
might not be as much as it needs to be, but I think there's just much more consciousness to respecting and building a child's self-esteem and their ability to
mm,
make decisions. And for instance, I do believe that Britney Spears and even Justin Timberlake, as young people on the Mickey Mouse Club, they chose, at a very young age, they were excited to perform, and they enjoyed doing
mm.
that. I enjoyed it as well, but I didn't initiate it. And
Yeah.
I have a little granddaughter that initiates. She just loves it. It's just a natural thing in her. And what you need is an adult that is there to provide the security and the love and emotional support for that child to find their way.
Mm,
And whatever happens along the way, that there's a foundation. I always come back to that, that there's a
mm.
foundation that they can return to, and they know that that their self-esteem is being safeguarded.
I'm really interested just to follow up on this idea of the experience of what happened with Gina Lollobrigida. We sort of spoke about this idea of her potentially showing some jealousy, which led to someone else getting that part, but also the experience of what had happened with Mel Frank, which kind of turned you off that part. And I often find that when perhaps something doesn't go the way that I think it should have or I would have hoped for, that I engage in a lot of blame and self-blame and what I could have done differently. And I guess what I'm wondering is for you to come out of that experience where there was this potential for this movie role and for it to not come off really due to the external factors of a particular director doing something and then a star deciding which way she wanted to go, is how did you kind of square that in your mind, or were you able to move past that, particularly given you had that sense of obligation for the family?
I had a major distraction.
Ah, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I had my first love, ticking away in my
Mm,
heart, and that was my focus.
mm,
So, I wasn't crushed,
mm.
because I didn't vibe with either one of them. you know, and that's okay. I mean, don't necessarily have to work with people that you vibe with
Mm,
to, create something productive.
mm,
But it definitely helps. I think any ensemble, group of people that decide to work together and continue working together. I think we've maybe spoken about,
mm,
musical groups.
mm.
The longer they're together, there's just a synergy, and the love that they have for each other, or the tolerance they have for each other, going through life and all
Mm,
the changes, reflect in their longevity and in their creativity. So it was such an interesting experience, going
Mm.
to the villa and seeing, seeing who she was, and then
Yeah.
eventually, I'll be referring to her much later on in my life when life takes those interesting turns and you revisit an incident, that gives you even more clarity.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. And, certainly, she's been a star in Italy for a very long time and a very interesting character. I think she still lives in that house that you visited, which I've seen pictures of. It's quite opulent. But I think you've sort of raised this point about the vibing with people. And I don't know, the older I get and the more experience I have, I think it is really about, I don't want to, when things are not working, I mean, of course, you can't always help who you have to work with, for example, sometimes, but, I don't have as much tolerance for those situations where I know that whether it's the other person's agenda or just the dynamic is off.
Yeah.
It's a lot
Compatibility is really, and there's, that's kind of where I was going, in terms of division, this whole energy, and that's what I'm calling it, but the systems that we've been living with in our lifetimes that have led to a lot of destruction. And we are basically the perspective of the earth and what the earth is going through, and all life on earth is it's all interconnected. And, when we think of paying attention, maybe because of climate change, we're still not, in theory, we're still not seeing that we are one with the earth.
Yeah.
We are one with the earth. We are one with each other. And that's a whole concept. So it reminded me, I received a text out of the blue last night by a wonderful friend I have in Palm Springs, Troy. And he gifted me, just very randomly with a term that I learned in Hawaii many years ago. And it is ho'oponopono. And I won't spell it. There's ho'oponopono. For our listeners, please
look
Google
it up.
that.
Yep, and we can probably put it up on social media as well, so that if they do try to spell it and come up empty, they can find it.
Okay. It's a ritual that in Hawaii is done in a circle with a kahuna leading the ceremony. And what it is about dealing with problems. And, there is such an unending list of problems that we're all facing on this planet.
Yeah.
And what the Ho'oponopono suggests and recommends is that you, number one, face your problem. Face it head on, with this attitude, and you say about the problem, I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. That message, completely speaking to the problem, gives the problem the ability to give you a second chance to deal with it and release it. So I don't think that many people, look at problems saying, I love you.
No, it's like, get away from me. Yeah.
But we all realize that things happen for a reason. And what the ritual says is, if you, like a prayer, if you incorporate those 4 phrases, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. Thank you is for giving me a second chance to look at my problem, and not, in the Hawaiian ritual, it's in a circle where everyone is outspoken about their problem.
Mm.
Well, in the Western world, it would be more that the individual might face it, but energetically, there is an inclusion of those that are part of the problem.
Mm.
And so it takes some devotion and dedication. Ever since my friend made me, remember that term and refresh my memory of what it is. And then my dear friend Vicky in Hawaii, also going a little deeper into it because she's lived there for so long and practiced it. So I have now activated it in my life. And and it's another exercise in being humble and being disciplined. And it's so simple, but when you say it and you realize, okay, this is kind of what I'm focusing on, this particular problem or that particular problem, or maybe the problem is more universal, that it becomes quite emotional, and you feel it. And it's not heavy. That's the thing. It's not heavy because you're facing your problem.
For sure. It just sounds so, I think, apt for what is going on right now, but always. And it does almost remind me of a lot of the sort of loving kindness meditations and similar sort of practices in terms of being able to send out that love and that compassion for oneself as well as for other people, and particularly people that we might be having problems with. That idea of, may I be happy, may they be happy, and so on. And so it's really nice to get that perspective, which, as you said, is probably to some extent done in a more collective approach, although many of us may do it at that more individual approach. But as you said, when you do bring people into your thoughts and those what you say, they may not be there, but it certainly brings them in from that energy point of view.
Yes, we'll on our podcast with our community, we can create a virtual community and a virtual circle of Ho'oponopono.
Absolutely, that would be fantastic, and because I think we're getting and this leads into some Facebook comments we're getting, but we are really appreciating the community that we are starting to get around this podcast, and we would love to hear from absolutely anyone and everyone who would like to share an experience perhaps, or a question, or just a reflection, your own stories, your own perspectives on what we speak about. And we do have some Facebook comments. Michael Austin says, loved the latest episode, meeting Lenny and growing more independent, which is what we dealt with in the latest episode, of what you alluded to again today, Donna, in terms of once the movie role didn't come off, having something else that was perhaps more at front and center of your mind. So thank you, Michael, for that comment. We've got from Philip Karp, thank you, Donna, for the podcast. Scott Allen Brightmeyer says, loves the Secret Weapon podcast. It's the perfect fun behind the scenes look at the music world. That's awesome to hear.
Lovely.
And we've got one more. I mean, we've got some other ones, and I will share them in the future. So if I haven't gotten to everyone's, we will make sure we do that. But a friend of the podcast, Plastic EP, both you and I, Donna, went on his internet interview TV show a few months
super
ago. He's fun. He's a very fun guy. And Plastic EP says, greatest podcast. The stories are the coolest. She's an American living music legend and actress. And Plastic EP is actually in my neck of the woods, in another state, but he is in Melbourne, so we say hello to him too.
Hello, Plastic.
And anyone that's interested in seeing Donna's interview or my interview can go onto the Plastic EP webpage on YouTube and track those down. But I think we've covered it. We've traveled the world today.
And hopefully the message of love becomes the virus. We want to go viral with love.
Yes, and that would be a nice one to go viral with. So we will continue next time. As always, wonderful to speak with you, Donna, and we look forward to doing that with our listeners again soon.
I love you, Adam.
Love you too.
Love's a secret weapon.
I can touch the stars, I can reach the moon, I can soar up in a cloudless sky. Ah, something's in the air, something's coming soon, stirring all the leaves as I pass by. It's gotta be love, it's gotta be love, I know. Oh, oh, oh. Yes, love.